The sun was already high overhead, but people had been walking for hours. Their shoes were filled with dust. Children had grown tired, and mothers had lifted them onto their backs. The elderly leaned on their walking sticks with every step. No one stopped, because the news had spread from ear to ear so fast that stopping was not a luxury anyone could afford. Jesus was there, near the Sea of Galilee, on a remote hillside, and everyone who heard this, no matter how far away they were, had gotten to their feet. The sick, the blind, those with wounds that had not healed for years, those who carried a hollow in their chest that they could never fill, all of them were walking in the same direction. First, small groups arrived, then those groups grew, then hundreds became thousands, thousands became tens of thousands, and as evening approached, as the sun began to turn golden, there were 5,000 men, only men. Women and children had not even been counted. The real number was perhaps 15,000, perhaps 20,000. No one knew exactly, but everyone knew that the sun was setting and they had nothing in their hands. When Jesus saw them, he stopped. He simply looked, and something opened inside him. The scripture uses a very simple but very heavy word for that moment. He had compassion. Jesus had compassion on them, because he knew what he saw in their eyes. These were not curious tourists. These were people who had lost their way at some point in their lives. People searching for a light inside their desperation. They were like sheep without a shepherd, says the scripture. And Jesus sat down and began to speak. Hours passed. The sun slowly descended. People stood and waited, sat down, leaned against one another. But no one got up. No one left. Because when Jesus spoke, nothing else mattered. He healed the sick among them. He comforted those who were crying. And every person inside that crowd, even in the middle of tens of thousands, felt as if he was speaking only to them. But then the disciples grew uneasy. The sky was beginning to darken. The place was remote. There was no village nearby, no shop, no bread. The disciples came close to Jesus and offered a suggestion that was logical, reasonable, and practical. Send them away, they said. Let them go to the nearby villages and buy themselves something to eat. It is getting late. What can we possibly do here? This suggestion was exactly what any sensible person would have said. But Jesus turned to them and said something they never expected. You give them something to eat. The disciples looked at each other. Philip did the math immediately, because Philip always did the math. He said even 200 denarii would not be enough for this many people to each have even a small piece. 200 denarii, the equivalent of more than 6 months of work. They did not have it. They had nothing. At that moment, Andrew stepped forward. There was something strange in his voice, as if he was saying something and already knew how absurd it would sound. There is a boy here, he said, and he has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Then he stopped, but he continued, But what are these among so many? 5 loaves, 2 fish. A child's lunch. A child's lunch in the middle of tens of thousands of hungry people. Mathematically, it meant nothing, but there was nothing else. Jesus turned and looked at the child. We know very little about that child. We do not know his name. We do not know how old he was. But that day he held out everything he had. He kept nothing for himself, and Jesus took it. Then he turned to the disciples and said, Have the people sit down in groups on the green grass. The people sat down, 50 by 50, 100 by 100. Groups formed across the hillside. Tens of thousands of people waited in silence in the evening light. Jesus raised his hands. He held the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He lifted his eyes toward heaven, and he gave thanks. He did not beg. He did not cry out in desperation. He simply looked up and said thank you, as if everything was already ready, as if those tens of thousands of people were already fed, and he was simply giving thanks for it. Then he broke the bread, and he gave it to the disciples, and the disciples turned and walked into that enormous crowd with almost nothing in their hands. And then something happened. No one saw exactly how it happened, but what happened was this. The bread did not run out. A disciple would reach out his hand, give a piece, look again, and it was still there. The fish did not run out. It passed from person to person, moved from group to group, spread from one end of the hillside to the other, and every person there that day reached out their hand and received food. Not a crumb, not a small piece. They ate and were satisfied. The scripture uses this word deliberately, satisfied. They all ate until they were full. Those people who had been sick for months, who had been walking for days, who had been waiting for hours, ate until they were full from 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. When it was all over, Jesus turned to the disciples and said, "Go, gather the leftovers. Let nothing be wasted." The disciples went and gathered. 12 baskets were filled. 12. After feeding tens of thousands of people, there was more food left than they had started with. The disciples stood there holding 12 baskets of abundance, and no one spoke, because there were no words. What had happened had happened. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but no one was in a hurry. People looked at each other as if to confirm that they had just experienced the same thing. An old man held his hands out in front of him and simply stared at them. A mother held her child tighter and tighter. A man sank to his knees and never got back up. No one knew what to say, because there were no words. What had happened, and no human language was wide enough to carry it. People returned home, returned to their villages, returned to their roads, but they were different as they left. Perhaps this difference was not visible on their faces. Nothing had changed about their clothes, but inside them, right in the center of their chests, there was something that had not been there that morning. They could not put it into words. If they tried to tell someone, what would they say? There were 5 loaves, they would say, 2 fish, and 20,000 people ate, and the sentence would stop right there, because there was no continuation to that sentence. The continuation could only be felt. There was a child there that day. We do not know his name. We do not know how old he was. We do not know where he came from inside that crowd. But we know that small bundle his mother had given him when he left home that morning. 5 loaves, 2 fish, a day's worth of food, just enough for himself. And that child opened that bundle and held it out without a second thought. He kept nothing for himself, even knowing he would go hungry in the middle of that crowd. And Jesus took it, and what happened, happened. That small thing, the moment it left that child's hands and passed into the right hands, was no longer small. It was no longer limited. It was no longer insufficient. It fed tens of thousands of people, and 12 baskets were left over. This is the one truth that has not changed since that day. No matter how small the thing in your hands is, no matter how insufficient it looks, no matter how foolish it seems, when it is surrendered to the right hands, it makes the impossible possible. That child did not think in mathematics. He did not hold back his hand thinking it would not be enough. He simply gave, and the world changed. If you want to see more stories like this one, stories that will make you see Jesus like never before, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next.